Rob, it's great to be able to chat with you today. I met you a couple years ago here in Kansas, but then we found out our families go way back. When I met your father, we realized that he grew up in the same small town as my grandparents and great grandparents. He knew them well. And he told me stories about my family that I didn't even know, that my siblings didn't even know. And so then I'm like messaging my mom, and she's like, "Oh yeah, that's true." Nothing bad, but anyway, it was so interesting to connect with him. And then we also figured out that your brother married my first cousin. So something in the stars has connected our families.
That's right. Yeah, my dad, he loves Teton Valley, Idaho, and he has every fact and statistic filed away.
And he's a professor, right? So he's
Correct. Yeah, he was a history professor, so it comes natural to him.
well, he probably didn't expect that his son would have done all of the things that his son has done. And one of those things that his son has done is you're now our beef guy. We buy our beef from you, but you've done so much more than that. And so I was wondering if we could just start with maybe an overview of kind of your you could do personal arc slash professional arc, and then maybe we can go into a little bit more detail on some of those things that you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. So the funny thing is my dad grew up in a small rural town, so he's to this day just doesn't understand the appeal of getting back into agriculture. He worked so hard to get away from the
Get out
small
of it.
town, and for so many of those guys, they view that, oh, that's something you do because you have to, not because you love it and want to do it. Now there are a lot of people in ag who love it and wouldn't trade it, but there's also the run away from it mentality, and that's certainly that's certainly the side he's on. I think they're starting to understand me though.
Uh,
Anyway, yeah, so growing up, I was just always fascinated with nature. I remember one of my really good friends to this day, he says, "Yeah, I'd try to come over to play." And you'd say, "I can't come over. I'm watching nature on PBS." And so I was just always fascinated with the natural world.
Real quick,
And
and I remember doing that, like I'm playing video games, like kind of busy with video games. Maybe let's play a little later, but you're watching. How old is this that you're watching
oh,
nature?
5, 6, 7
Oh my gosh.
years old. Yeah. Yeah, my dad subscribed me to the Ranger Rick magazine, which is all about nature and the outdoors and stuff like that. So always had an affinity for that. And in high school, we had excellent biology teachers at my high school. And one of them, Merrill Webb, he's just famous for getting everyone into birding. So he'd take us all out birding and get us excited about learning all the different kinds of birds around the state.
What's that like when you go birding?
Oh, you just take your binoculars and beat the bushes and just try to see everything you can. It's so there's a little bit of a game to it, right? How many species can I spot today or this month, and so forth. And it's just nice to be outside. And it's a challenge, right? To how many can I get? And there's always the one that gets away that you don't identify in the moment, and that keeps you going back for more. Yeah. And then I had another great teacher in high school. She worked with a professor at the nearby university, and we did a floristic inventory in southern Utah. So I got to backpack, look at plants. And so that's what got me in sort of the plant biology side of biology, was those kinds of experiences.
Interesting. So from a young age, because I remember going on a scouting trip, and I think we were doing birding, and for me, that was just not, it's like I'm just like staring at a bush, and I didn't see all of the magic in it that you did. I'm a little kid just staring at a bush. So I'm curious, what is it about that, like, what is it about you, or what is it about that experience that how did you appreciate it in a way that I couldn't as a child, you think?
I don't know. There was just something magical for the very first time you go to a wetlands, and there's just these exotic birds with crazy, color patterns, and there's stuff flying everywhere, and you're just overwhelmed by the variety. And Yeah, if you're just kind of looking at a few drab sparrows in the bushes somewhere, that's not fun. So when you want to introduce somebody to birding, you got to take them to a wetland
Okay.
where they can see all the really cool shorebirds and ducks and stuff like that,
Which
pelicans. Yeah.
I will say we went on a camp out one time, and it was fun walking on the camp out with you because you could point out, all of the different trees and berries, and so it's great to be getting all of this knowledge and as you're walking along the paths.
Yeah, having an enthusiastic mentor is an important part, and that's what made Mr. Webb such an awesome biology teacher. He just was so excited about it. Even the kids who didn't really want to get into it, they couldn't help it, and everyone else was getting into it, so it was just infectious.
Wow, yeah, the value of a great teacher.
Yeah. So I liked plants, I liked ecology, I liked being outside, but somewhere I got this idealistic uh, idea that I needed to feed the world. I don't know where that came from, but just this idea that, boy, there's a lot. Well, I guess I was plugged into the environment, and so I was aware of a lot of environmental problems and global poverty and issues like that. So my interest shifted more to maybe we can genetically engineer crops to feed more people and use less land to produce the same amount of food. And so during my undergrad, I was a botany major, but I took some cell and molecular classes and genetics, and they were fascinating too. And that's what I found in my life is the more I learn about any topic, like, oh, that's really fascinating, right? So I've always just had a wide variety of interests. I've liked languages and music, and really enjoyed math and performing and choir. And but my consistent theme is I have a hard time being consistent in any one area.
I can
so
relate.
so I've always been a generalist, but the love of nature and then later cattle. Those have, for whatever reason, those have never gone away. So that's sort of what I've stuck with.
And soccer.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I enjoyed playing a lot of soccer growing up.
So you're studying. So yeah, how did you choose your major then? Was it a pretty clear choice for you when you decided to go to the university?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I just knew I wanted to do something involving plants, which does not mean I'm a good gardener or horticulturalist. Like people, and I'm sorry, I don't have any practical advice for you on raising your plants. I just know how they work on the inside. Was when I got to the end of my plant biology education, that was sort of where I was.
But you also are good at cutting trees. I mean, you know about trees, and you helped us a little bit with our oak trees. And
Yeah, yeah, that's sort of a byproduct of ranching and farming is you have to be able to get rid of trees when they're in the wrong place, and it's just satisfying to cut up a tree. So I've done a little bit of work with the tree service, on the ground crew, and I sell firewood every winter and like running a saw. Yeah, it's just kind of fun physical side of what I do.
okay, so you go to undergrad then, and you want to study plants, and you get this idea of wanting to feed the world. So as you were thinking about your career in undergrad, did you do internships, or
I
how did you end
did
up?
I did research in a couple of different labs at the
Okay.
university. Yeah, so one lab they studied plant respiration in plants, and in the other lab we worked on quinoa, which is a South American crop. There's a big quinoa research group at BYU. It's still going, and that lined up a lot with my interests, trying to develop a crop that was important in the developing world, but wasn't really a cash crop where most of the research is focused.
And so how did that research? So is you're thinking, okay, it's I'm going to graduate here. How am I going to make an income and mesh this with my interests? How did you decide to continue ultimately your education?
Sure. Well, my dad being a professor, that was just sort of the default track, right? It was what I knew and was familiar with, and um, I I wanted to develop uh, new varieties of crops, genetically engineered crops, and that's just something that requires graduate education. So I went to North Carolina State and pursued a PhD in plant biology with a minor in biotechnology. And I ended up, instead of working on genetically modifying crops, I worked on plant diseases, fungal diseases in plants, and characterizing genes and proteins in those plant microbe interactions. And again, it was one of those things where I wouldn't have picked that, but I really liked the program there, and that's where the grant funding was for that project. And the more I worked on it, hey, this is interesting too. So I specialized in that. But as I was getting near the end of the process, I realized that I just didn't have what it took to be an academic researcher in terms of temperament and interests and focus. I didn't want to write grant proposals. You know, being a biologist in the scientific sense requires hyper specialization. You have to become a world expert on one little area, and you have to really love that or convince yourself that you do. And you also have to have a really high threshold for experiments not working and doing them again and again, which is funny. I say that was a deterrent to me continuing down that path, but that's kind of that theme repeats in agriculture
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure.
And you knew you were a generalist.
Yeah, I try. I don't know that I knew it. I was trying to be a specialist, and I just had a really hard time making myself be that.
What did you do your dissertation on?
So I worked on a mold that grows on developing corn and peanuts, and it produces a toxin. And so I studied plant proteins that are antifungal, and then I also studied genes in the biosynthetic pathway for the toxin that this fungus produces.
So as you're doing your PhD, are you starting to think that, so you're starting to realize that you're probably not going to be a full-time researcher, but you were still interested in teaching? Or did you, at that point in your PhD, did you start looking at going into industry, or were you still on still the mindset of going into academia, just more of the teaching school?
So I started to explore everything I could do with my degree. I looked at being, patent law. I
Oh,
looked
wow.
at working in biotechnology industry. I was in North Carolina, and there was some decent plant biology industry there. And along this period, in the same time, somehow I stumbled upon a book about live on a homestead and raise all your own food. And maybe it was some escapism, right, during the final crucible of finishing your dissertation. But I really enjoyed reading about all the things you could do on 1 acre of land to produce as much food as possible. And there was something really satisfying about that. So I started to read more on that. I went to the library at the college, and I searched up how to become a farmer. And there were not a lot of books on that,
Wow.
but there was one book called You Can Farm by Joel Salatin, who's a pretty big name he's probably the big name in regenerative agriculture. And I read about how he used ecology principles and agricultural principles to produce food and make a living. And I was sold at that point. I just realized, wow, this is fascinating. I don't know when I can do it, but this is what I want to do with my life.
And so about how old are you at this point?
27, 28, something
Okay.
like that. Maybe, yeah.
But you've still you've got the PhD, and so you're exploring all these options, but then you ended up still going into academia for a while. So how did that
Right.
happen?
Yeah, I had small children. I needed to provide for my family and find some sort of justification for spending so many years in school. And so I thought, well, if I could find a community college or junior college where I teach, that'd be a low stress professional option that would give me some summers and time to start learning how to raise livestock and develop my other interest.
Interesting. So going to a teaching school was kind of all part of the long-term plan.
Correct. Yeah, I looked at all the states, not too hot, not too cold, and where land might be affordable, which pretty much narrowed it down to the Midwest.
Interesting.
Yeah,
And so that's where you were started applying to junior colleges, community colleges, was in that region.
correct. Yep. And I was in North Carolina, so it was green and lots of trees, and so I thought I don't want to be on the Great Plains because it's just it's a flat, windy, topographically boring place. But I saw a couple of openings in Kansas, and I had a distinct feeling that I did not have a job, and I better not turn down available options. And so I applied in Hutchinson, Kansas, at the community college there, and had a really good interview. And I liked the faculty. They felt like, how do I say this without being insulting? They just felt like normal people. Uh, versus your faculty at the research one at universities. They're also normal people, but they think they know everything, and they really are experts in their field. And so it's just a different feeling around community college faculty. I said I could hang out with people like this.
There is, having been at, well, a number of different universities, one thing I was surprised at some of the places I've been, or maybe even, well, I wouldn't say at all of the places, some of the people, but some of the people you meet, you really do meet some brilliant, arrogant people. And
Sure.
I was thinking, like, oh, we're going into these scientific fields, so we're all going to be very curious and open-minded. And while there is a lot of that in a lot of places, you also really do find some very kind of strong-willed, strong-minded people who are very confident in the things they know, and confident in the things they think they know.
Agreed.
So did you have other interviews at other schools?
Let's see. I did, yeah. Well, I had interviews scheduled at a couple other schools, but the more I looked at this place, I said, this is what I'm looking for, and they had the offer, and so I accepted.
So what were you teaching?
Yeah, so I taught general biology for non-majors. So biology for people who had to have a science credit, with a lab attached, and did not pick biology because they loved biology.
Okay.
And then I also, over time, I started teaching anatomy and physiology. And I also taught a class for students going to become radiology technicians, biology for radiology. And then I taught a science majors lab. So it wasn't a very wide selection of topics. And as you'll learn about me, or as you know about me, after I need some variety, and I taught there for 8 years, but after a while it was hard to keep teaching the same topics for sure.
But see, I was thinking as you were describing it, I was like, oh, this is kind of a broad set of topics from biology to anat and phys.
Yeah, that's true. And the nice thing about general biology is you do get to cover from atoms all the way to the biosphere. So it was fun to cover everything. And the nice thing about teaching is you go through the semester, and then the project's over, and then you get to start over, which is, after doing a dissertation that felt like the never-ending project, it was nice to have some seasonality and cyclical patterns to work.
Did you have a favorite class that you were teaching?
I think over time, the anatomy and physiology became a favorite because the students were dialed in. They all needed it to go on to some sort of healthcare profession, and so they wanted to do well. And they, most of them were working hard, and they you felt needed. So yeah.
So you taught for 8 years. Are you teaching like three classes a semester, four classes a semester?
So in the community college world, you have a pretty high teaching load because you don't have a research component. And so your base teaching load is 15 credit hours per semester, fall and spring. So if
Wow.
you did 3 credit hour lecture, that would be 5 sections of that lecture. Of course, I had labs, and so I the most I would ever have of the exact same lecture would be 3. But by the third time you're giving that lecture, you're tired of hearing yourself.
Yeah, so that is different. So the research institution, you're teaching maybe one class a semester or two classes a semester if you're on the research track and then doing research the rest of the time. So you're teaching 5 classes a semester. So in that instance, the variety is nice, but anytime you're teaching more than one class, of course, it takes a lot more time to have these different preps.
For sure. Yeah, and just a lot of grading, right? I taught a lot of labs, so and we didn't have like a TA to help grade the labs or anything like that. You were it for your students.
So in the community college, what was your favorite thing about teaching, and what would you say was your least favorite thing?
My favorite thing was the students. You just got a wide variety of students. They were respectful, not a lot of attitude. I just never had attitude problems from the students. They were uh, they enjoyed being around each other, and not all of them were excited about learning or education.
Biology or
A lot of them were there to play sports or just or focus on their major, whatever that may be. But they were by and large conscientious, respectful, and just fun. It's fun to be around college age students. They're high energy, and
Mhm.
they see the world through fresh eyes, and it's enjoyable.
And how about the worst thing or the hardest thing?
Oh, just monotony, right? Grading the same assignment again.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But the colleagues were great, the students were great. And so that's what made it doable for sure.
And so what was your tenure requirements and how long did it take you to get tenure?
Tenure is a 3-year process in the state of Kansas, and it's based entirely on your teaching reviews and your supervisor evaluation. You don't have to write up a tenure package. Uh, so yeah, it's 100% on your teaching, which is that's the mission of those
Yeah.
institutions, and they take it pretty seriously.
And so then you got tenure, and the whole time while you're teaching, you're still kind of thinking about the ranch.
But yeah, and I bought a small property and started raising chickens. Chickens are the gateway drug of agriculture, of livestock agriculture, and then added some goats, and then I was able to talk someone into leasing me 20 acres of pasture and added some cattle, and just kept learning.
So this is the 8 years while you're still a community college professor. And at what point did you decide to just go full time, and how do you go about that? How do you leave tenure and go all in on this dream you've had for more than a decade?
Well, the next part of the story is that I divorced and remarried, so I moved to a non-tenure track teaching and academic advising position for 3 years
At
at UMKC, University of Missouri, Kansas City. And that involved a commute. But as soon as I moved to Lawrence, I was able to find a 10-acre piece of ground that no one was really doing anything with and lease it. So I brought my goats and chickens up, and
Oh, that's what I was wondering. So you did bring your
oh
animals with
yeah.
you.
Yeah, it was entertaining pulling into town with all of that. I had a U-Haul, and I thought I could put the goats. I just had a handful of goats. I thought I could put them in the back, but it just got too hot. And so I put them up in the cab with me and my livestock dog.
Your goats are in the.
And of course, along the way, they made a mess. And so my wife is not excited when I asked her to meet me and bring supplies to help clean it up when I pulled into town.
So, but you don't have cows yet.
Right. Well, yeah. So the next part of the story is I'm working in Kansas City and I have goats and they start to, goats get out unless you have really good fencing. And after that happened a couple times while I was in Kansas City, I decided, well, cattle are easier to keep than goats. So I'm just going to sell all these goats and start raising cattle. So at that point, I would buy a steer and keep him grass fed until he's big enough, and then find people to go in to buy the beef and use a local processor. And I just started building that business.
So going back real quick, how do goats get out? Do they jump the fence? Do the fences break? Like what? Do they
Yeah, they're
squeeze
just
through?
less respectful of electric fence, and they are more prone to jump, or they're more curious about what's on the other side and stuff like that.
Well, I think I've told you this, and I'm not proud of it, but at the time when this happened, I just thought it was the funniest thing in the world. When I was in high school, me and my buddies would ride four-wheelers in the hills behind our town, and I remember, again, I'm not proud of this, but as my high school brain just thought this was the coolest thing. We would, ride into a pasture and start chasing the cows on the four-wheeler. And one of the most amazing things I ever saw was we ran this cow basically into a corner, and I'm just like so curious what it's going to do, and it just jumps the fence so easily,
Yep.
takes a right turn, jumps the cattle guard right back into the pasture. And so that was my first exposure. Well, one, I didn't know cows could jump. Two, I didn't know they could leave at any moment. They can leave
Yeah.
if they're in
Yeah, for
reasonably good health.
sure. Yeah, I mean, fencing is primarily a psychological barrier. Even a good physical perimeter fence. Like we use mainly electric fencing, but which is also mostly psychological. If they hit it at a gallop, right, they're just going to go straight through it. But they want to be where their friends are, and they don't want to feel pain, so they stay inside the fence. There's a life metaphor in there somewhere.
Well, and it's funny too, because I guess I just hadn't thought of it in those terms of one, they can jump the fence, but two, they can run through the fence at any moment as well. I mean, maybe they get tangled up in some of the wires or something, but
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
so big
I
and
did something
strong.
stupid similarly once, where there's a cow on one side of the fence and I was on the other. I'm going to chase this thing, and it started running, and it just kind of ran through the barbed wire fence, and I felt really bad.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, they are powerful animals that don't know their strength.
So you decide to start raising cattle, but you also, it wasn't just about trying to maximize the number of cattle per square inch of your ranch either.
No, so another person I found along the way was Alan Savory, who he's from Zimbabwe, actually, from European background, but
Huh.
he developed this concept called holistic management, which is using livestock in arid environments to promote uh, ecological health and produce food. And that was counter to everything I'd learned growing up, about the environment. Out west, cattle are the devil from an environmental point of view, right? They just overgraze everything and turned everything into the desert. But what Alan Savory showed is, well, if you exclude cattle, arid environments still desertify. And
Hmm.
so, yes, if you leave them to continuously graze a large area, they will degrade the environment. But if you remove large herbivores from an environment, then it will still degrade and desertify. So there's this concept where you graze cattle at high densities for very short duration, and then they move, which mimics what we think would happen if they were in large natural herds with pack hunting herbivores chasing them all over the landscape. And so it's that system that grasses evolved under that regenerative ranchers try to mimic. So high stocking density on a small area for 1 to 3 days maximum. The shorter, the better, and then move to the next area. And the benefits are profound.
Did you know about this before you started buying your first cattle?
Yeah, I'd come across Alan Savory prior to that.
So as you trade out your goats for the cattle, this was the plan from the beginning then.
It was the hope. Yeah, it's kind of hard to do it at on 10 acres with 2 or 3 or 4 head at a time, but that was what I wanted to do. And actually, before I my very first time doing this was actually before I moved up to Lawrence. When I'd gotten that 20-acre pasture, I talked to local cattle owner to, hey, bring in your cattle, just pay me a certain amount per day per head to graze them on my pasture, and I'll rotate them around and see how this goes. And it worked fantastically. I mean, the cattle figured it out really quickly. They like to move somewhere fresh where they're not, smelling their own byproducts.
Mhm.
And it's good for the grass. And so that I'd sort of done a proof of concept with about 40 head of cattle on a small pasture. And so I just knew it was the kind of work that was satisfying for me for some reason, for whatever reason, right? Just seeing a really healthy stand of forage, turning the cattle into it, seeing them trample it, mix the carbon back into the soil, fertilize it, and then move on. There's just something really deeply, I don't know why, rewarding for me about that process.
So is this the beginning of Eco Cattle then when you trade the goats and you
Yeah. Yeah, the guy I was leasing from, he was in a small business network referral chapter here in Lawrence, and he said, "Hey, you should come visit us and start a business," And I thought, well, what encapsulates what I'm trying to do? And well, I thought eco cattle, right? I like the ecology, I like the cattle, and I want to produce something of value that people can eat when it's all said and done. And so that's where I came up with that name. And my logo is kind of the recycling arrows with a cow and grass in the middle, right?
and you're sending out weekly or bi-weekly newsletters, bi-monthly, I should say, newsletters.
Yeah, we try to just keep our customer base informed with what we're doing. I think a lot of people connect with landscape and agriculture and environment, and I think all of us sort of want that, and so it's something that we do that people enjoy seeing and helps keep us connected to our customers.
What's the most challenging thing, or what are some of the biggest challenges you deal with running Eco Cattle?
Well, there's a lot of challenges. It's a very, I think we were talking about it once. You said you're playing farmland in real life, or
Yeah,
Farmville. Is that the game?
yeah.
Yeah. So there's shifting variables. Every season has different weather. Hay prices, cattle prices, fuel prices fluctuate. You have to market your product, so you have to learn about advertising and marketing, which I'm not excited about, right? I'm interested in production, but in order to produce, I need to market. Um, and then everything, you're a startup in an industry where you have well established people who have been doing it for generations who think you're crazy. And then everything, double your budget and double your timeline, and that's kind of accurate versus what you projected on your spreadsheet.
In one of the recent emails from your newsletter, you were excited about a dung beetle. Can you describe why?
Sure. So, I mean, one of our goals is nutrient cycling, which is taking all of your plant biomass and helping it decompose and cycle back into nutrients available for the next group of plants that are going to grow up through that. And the cattle are a critical part of that, because I think of a cow, right? Its gut is a giant reservoir of microbes that break down biomass, and you want them spreading that all over the landscape, mixing it into the soil. And the problem and challenge is that flies like that stuff too. And so you want as many earthworms and dung beetles and other beneficial invertebrates to cycle that manure back into the soil as quickly as possible. And so dung beetles are one of nature's solutions to an excess resource. And of course, a lot of producers, they deworm their cattle, which kills their earthworms, it harms the other insects. And so they just never get to the benefits of what's out there and what you can work with instead of against. So dung beetles for us is an indicator that we're doing things the right way. And so we were just thrilled to, and if we saw one, then there was a whole bunch that we didn't see. Yeah. Because what they'll do is they'll roll up a ball of manure and they'll dig a tunnel and they'll bury it. So that's providing tunneling through your soil, which is good for soil structure and water infiltration, and nutrient cycling. It provides nutrient cycling as well, and helps cut down flies. So it's a big win.
What's the benefit of flies, and what's the purpose of flies? Because they are everywhere on the ranch.
I don't know what the benefit is. Flies are a problem, right, for us, because they're living off the blood of your animals and they annoy them. So I'm sure ecologically they have some greater purpose, but from a cattle production standpoint, we're just trying to figure out ways to mitigate them. We'll never defeat them entirely, but just try to mitigate them.
So dumb question, but the cattle are annoyed by the flies because they're just everywhere, but I guess there's just nothing the cows can do about it.
Yeah, they swish their tail and move, and it's just part of being a cow. You just get bitten by flies from June through September.
So as you're thinking about eco cattle and this career path that you've chosen, what's the most rewarding thing for you? Is you work on the ranch, or is your seeing dung beetles? Where do you find the most satisfaction?
Well, there's two levels. Like there's what would I call it, the hedonic benefits of just being outside and seeing something, helping to make something beautiful and functional and in tune with the needs of wildlife and the ecosystem. So that's just at a more primal level, just satisfying. And then at a different level, just taking an idea and a dream and making it happen, and learning and failing and improving along the way. My dad would always share the quote from Thomas Paine. He said, "What we achieve too cheaply, we esteem too lightly.
Oh,
'Tis
cool.
dearness only that gives everything its value." And so I love doing it, but it's also really hard to be a startup in a long-standing industry, and to learn a lot through trial and error.
Yeah, what's your long-term goal? Like, what's your current dream? I was listening to Steve Young give a talk the other day, and his dad used to always tell him, you always have to have a plan, you always have to have a dream. And sometimes, so Steve's dad was named Grit, and Grit would ask him, what's your plan? And Steve would say, I'm going to be a Hall of Famer. And Grit was like, no, that's your dream. What's your plan? And continue on with the story. Once Steve finished playing in the NFL, his dad asked him one day, what's your dream? Because he'd already achieved his main dream. But what's your dream?
So my dream would be to successfully implement all of these holistic management principles at a practical scale, to where, hey, I can support myself and my business partner. I didn't bring up that part of the story, but I've got a business partner, which has been critical. This thing pays for itself and pays for me. And, And each year, our soil quality gets better, our beef product gets better, and our biodiversity on our ranches gets better. And so that's sort of I guess that's my midterm goal. And then beyond that, I'd just love to work with other people that want to do it, help them succeed. And that, that goes back all the way to this idealistic feed the world thing. It's a great model, and it's something that can be really beneficial. It is beneficial. It's making a huge difference in places all over the world. They did a guy who studied this at Texas A&M. His name's Richard Teague. He looked at the soil survey of Texas, all the ranch land in Texas, and he looked for all of the ranches that had the highest soil organic matter, which basically that tells you it's a soil health indicator. And without fail, every ranch that had the highest soil organic matter followed holistic management principles. And so I'd like to be a success story and then help create other success stories down the road.
It's interesting to think about kind of the short-term benefits and the long-term consequence of pesticides and what we put into the ground and what we put into our bodies. It can be so easy for many of us, if not all of us, to just take for granted that these pesticides, they stay around for a long time, and if they get into water, we treat the water, but then there's consequences to that, and then we're dealing with the consequences of the consequences. And kind of like you were saying earlier, we end up fighting against kind of nature in a battle that at some point you have to pay a cost for.
Yeah, for sure. And especially places like Utah, like Arizona, like California, where there's lower precipitation. You look at the environmental challenges in those areas where, okay, we don't have enough precipitation, but then we have big flooding problems. We have wildfire problems. We have soil erosion problems. All of these are things that cattle, if managed properly, can address and improve. And I think it's catching on in the industry. I think most cattlemen, cattle producers, they've heard of these ideas now. But for a lot of them, it's like, well, it's management intensive and it doesn't fit into my system. But bit by bit, it's something people are aware of now. Grazing, well, that's a whole other. Anyway, it's making its way into general consciousness in the agricultural production ag community, and I just think it needs a few more proof of concept examples in every county to continue to spread the idea.
Well, as we wrap up, if you had to, as you think back on your career and your interests and your successes and challenges, are there any lessons, 2 to 3, 1 to 2 lessons that you've learned that you would most like to pass on to others?
Yeah, for sure. First one I thought of was a quote that I think Thomas S. Monson shares this pretty regularly. It said, history turns on small hinges. And another cliche is the little things are the big things. And so as I look at my own successes and failures, what I've observed is that brilliance, talent, and grand gestures are never going to outperform small, consistent, persistent efforts. And so I see that in some areas of my life where, I did not make small, consistent, persistent efforts. And I may have felt like I had more ability or talent in an area, but over time you see yourself get surpassed, and you see people who, boy, I knew you in high school and you just seemed like a scrub, and now you're so accomplished and professional and impressive. Right? Well, because they were consistent and persistent in small things in an area that they really cared about.
It's a simple, unappreciated, profound idea. And it's taught in The Tortoise and the Hare, right? Such a simple book, but just like slow, steady, consistent over the long run, it just can't be beat, or it's hard to beat.
Yep, the tree root's always going to push up the sidewalk if you give it enough time.
Interesting, and I know that on the street we live in. So how do you try to teach that to your kids? Like, what do you or
No, I would just say the best way to teach it is to find the areas where you can do it and live it.
yeah,
And
example.
yeah, and consistency, like I've shared, that's I view it as like one of my biggest personal challenges.
Mm.
but but it's also the times when I can be consistent. Those are the areas where I just see the best results.
Yeah, so great insight, great quotes. Any other lessons you'd like to
I,
share?
I guess the other thing, and we didn't get into this too much, was just don't try to go it alone. For me, adding a business partner added a level of accountability and someone to share ideas with, and we complement each other's strengths in a lot of ways. Same thing with marriage or a good friendship. It's just if you just work between your own ears, it just you need the filter of other people who can help you develop and weed out the bad ideas and fertilize the good ones.
A friend of mine was saying, he was telling me the other day that everybody needs a coach in their life to tell them when they're being stupid.
Yeah.
And that is, as a football player, you're watching, they film every single practice, every single play from every practice, and then you watch it the next day, and the coach, the good coaches, of course, are inspiring and helpful, but they are pointing out every little thing. And we do need that. We do need people to help us out and push us. And I was even thinking in terms of when I first met you, you were going to perform a song, and you started singing, and it blew me away. So I recorded you singing, but I didn't record the video of you. I was recording the ground just so I could pick up the audio.
Uh-huh.
So then I went home and played it for my wife, and you were singing, is it Bring Him Home?
Yeah, bring him home from Les
Bring
Miserables.
Bring Him Home from Les Miserables. But how would you describe the training that you received in music?
Oh, it'd be the same thing, right? Continually pointing out your mistakes and then pointing out the successes and trying to balance those. And I'm sure I cried in some singing lessons. I was a pretty sensitive soul when I first started taking singing in like junior high. And yeah, it's just hard to be told you're doing something wrong when you think you're so wonderful.
And how
So,
many years did you take singing lessons?
oh, I did it all through junior high and high school.
And when I say singing lessons, it's not, it's hard to appreciate what kind of singer you are. What kind of singer are you, I guess?
So yeah, I'd learned classical style singing. So I'm a classical baritone, and we had a really good couple of really good neighborhood singing teachers, and my older brother does this professionally, and I just couldn't be consistent with it. So in fact, he gave me a voice lesson a couple of years ago, and he said, "Man, if I just had 6 months to a year to work with you, we could get you pretty good." Because he's like, "I know exactly what your voice is because we have the same voice." So
Yeah.
um, yeah, but
Yeah.
it's a lot of trial and error, and of course, kind of like watching your own film, listening to yourself sing, it's just so painful because the way you sound on a
Oh,
recording
yeah,
different than how
yeah.
you sound in your own ears.
When you say your brother does this professionally, who does he sing professionally for?
So he auditions for roles across the country and will travel and rehearse for a couple weeks and then perform. And then he teaches as an adjunct professor, teaches voice as well.
And when you say classically trained, so is that opera or is it not? Is opera something
Yeah,
different?
operatic style for
Okay.
sure. Uh-huh.
Well, anyway, this when you were performing, I didn't know you could sing, and I certainly didn't know you had been trained in classical operatic style. And so as you were singing Bring Him Home from Les Mis, and just blowing me away. And so what I did, like I said, I was recording the audio, and then for the very last 2 seconds, I shifted the phone up and um, filmed you to later then share with my wife. And I'm playing the audio, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, this is just like amazing, like so good," like bringing her to tears. And then sees that it's you, and I would never, you just see you, and you would never guess that. You're such an incredible singer. Well, I love the lessons you shared. I think they're fantastic. They're perfect for the podcast. Uh, I wouldn't, you know, winning the most interesting man in the world is a really tough competition, but I wouldn't count you out because of your interests and knowledge in so many fields. It's so great to hear your story and learn more about you and learn your lessons. So thanks so much for coming on today, Rob.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, and I'm a regular listener to Mickles and Dimes, and I appreciate all that you do.
All right, thanks.